In the world of solo leveling, hunters are a really big deal because they are humans who possess the magical abilities needed to fight against the monsters that humankind is in battle with. But given all the different classes of hunters and how many of them are just in S rank in general, it can be really hard to keep track of them, which is why in today's video we're going to be breaking down every major S rank hunter in solo leveling story. And for the purposes of this video, we'll consider this the sequel to the Hunters Explained video, where we go in depth on what hunters are and the different combat types of hunters and non-combat types, so we won't repeat the information in that video. For this video, we'll be breaking down the S rank hunters, explaining their powers and what you need to know about the personalities and characters. Starting things off, we're going to be going with the series protagonist and the one you're probably the most curious about, which is Sun Jinwoo. When we first get introduced to him, he's a lowly E rank hunter down at the very bottom of the totem pole for hunters, but early on he gets blessed with a once-in-a-lifetime life-changing opportunity when he's chosen by the system after his party was nearly wiped out. The system chooses Jinwoo as its sole player and gives him the insane ability to level up in strength well beyond comprehensible levels. Jinwoo, as a result, gets extremely powerful, continuously leveling up as the story progresses. But what about his powers? That's probably what you're most curious about. Well, he's got a few that makes him extremely special and dangerous in combat. By now, you've probably seen that he heals faster than normal humans do, and the healing ability speeds up even faster when he goes to sleep. He's also a walking tank because he's got high durability, a great example being how he was still fighting at full power despite getting seriously wounded when he fought against the Architect. He's fast enough that he's moving at speeds that a majority of his opponents have trouble tracking his speed. We see him keeping up with the Frost Monarch's attacks and sending off attacks so fast that the Beast Monarch didn't realize he'd been hit by the attacks until he lost one of his legs. This is made even crazier when you realize that he can use Quicksilver to boost his speed by another 30%. So think of it like a supercharger on top of an already fast car. Due to his accelerated growth, extremely accelerated at that, the boost that he gets after every battle is insanely high, which makes him a Super Saiyan in the world of solo leveling. Because after every battle he survives, he doesn't just improve and get a little bit stronger, he jumps up several levels after every fight, which is how he was able to become the strongest hunter on his entire continent in only a few months of training. He's able to use Shadow Extraction. Shadow Extraction lets the user revive a beast or a hunter as a shadow soldier, and is activated by keywords and doesn't require any mana to use. Due to having such a large radius in which it can be used, it allows for a massive number of shadows to be extracted at once, which lets the user raise an army to command. But it has its own set of weaknesses. For instance, it can't be used on things or people who didn't make their own mana when they were alive. Also, the extraction is only possible for a certain period of time because mana gradually evaporates. It can't be used on demons because demons have contaminated mana, which is another thing. It can't be used on anyone or anything with contaminated mana. It also can't be used on anyone or anything that is a lot stronger than the user. There's also a limit to how many times you can use Shadow Extraction on a single target. He's also able to use Ruler's Authority. If that sounds overpowered, it's because it is. It's telekinesis on a high level. It's limited only to rulers and humans who have rulers who choose to give them incredible power to will, basically vessels. Rulers are the race of ancient angelic humanoids in the world of solo leveling, so of course they have this super overpowered ability. This should not be overlooked because when used at its full power, this skill has the attack potency of a black hole and can be used over a massive radius, and when it's used it doesn't consume any mana to use. However, there are drawbacks to using such an overpowered ability. Like for instance, it cannot be used to shift the tide in battle against a stronger opponent, despite it being so overpowered and being so diverse. So when you use it, it's best suited to use it against a weaker opponent, because against a stronger one it's not going to be as effective as you would have hoped it would have been. When Jinwoo uses it, he incapacitates the Architect statues in one shot, which is absolutely insane. Shadow Preservation allows Jinwoo to preserve his shadow in storage and monitor them by perceiving their weaknesses, by perceiving their senses. Shadow Exchange allows Jinwoo to move across large distances instantaneously by using shadows as portals. Due to the fact that this ability works like a gate, Jinwoo could take people with him when using this power, and it doesn't have time limits or mana consumption issues to worry about either. The usage of Shadow Exchange has evolved over time as the story's gone forward. When we first see him use this power, he was only able to use it when there was already a shadow soldier wherever he wanted to go. So for instance, if he wanted to go from location A to location C, he wouldn't be able to go there unless there was a shadow soldier in location C. If there wasn't one there, he would have to go the good old-fashioned way by walking or using another method, but this no longer applies to him. Now, another issue that was first experienced is that it worked by swapping places, and it had an insanely long cooldown period before it could be used once again. However, the moment that he was reborn as the new Shadow Monarch, all those limitations, they ultimately got lifted. Now, Dragon Sphere allows him to shoot off a monopack shout that comes from his soul, which strongly affects anyone weaker than him, filling them with immense panic and despair. However, it does come with some weaknesses to it. The first we just went over, it cannot be used on anyone stronger than him because they're completely above being affected by it. The next thing is that it applies to anyone who is weaker than him, including his own allies, which means he might actually affect his enemy, but he'd also affect other people inside of his party, which means it's best to use his power when he's fighting alone. Otherwise, your allies become useless. On top of that, he can erase his presence by making himself magically and physically hard to see by using stealth. You would think that someone with this much power, they'd be arrogant, but Jinwoo is actually the opposite. He's super humble, but he is also someone who has a desire to get stronger. It's why when he goes into a battle setting, he can flip the switch from being super relaxed and humble to being a ruthless killer of his enemies, and at times even talks down to his enemies in battle. While there is a change per se compared to how he was when he was weaker, where you saw more of his insecurities that came out as a result of his weakness and as a result of his own inadequacies, at his core, the true aspects of his true self, they're still there intact. Next, we have Sungwon, the father of Jinwoo. Like Jinwoo, Sungwon is in possession of insane physical power, easily overwhelming most of the people who he fought against in combat, at times leaving them with so much damage it took several months for them to recover from it in full from the damage he did to them. With just a single punch, he's able to send someone flying through several buildings and even do noticeable damage to the Frost Monarch in an attack. He's able to use Ruler's authority to move things with telekinesis and was fast enough that when combined with his agility, he was able to dodge both the Frost Monarch and Raken's attacks at the same time and deflect the attacks of the Frost Monarch with no difficulty. It's for those reasons he was considered one of the strongest humans in the world. He possessed a deep love for his family, and like any good family man in possession of a strong spirit and an even stronger fighting power, he could turn brutal at the drop of a hat towards anyone meant to do them harm, going so far at one point to beat someone half to death for trying to cross that line with him. He doesn't abuse the power that's bestowed upon him, going out of his way to help people caught in the crossfire of his battles and even choosing at times to spare someone that he could have easily killed. Next up, we have Dongo, someone who I personally don't care too much about, but for the sake of this video, I'll set my dislike for the character aside in order to be somewhat objective. He is one of the few S ranks who got their powers upgraded by Norma Selner, who was one of the most powerful S rank hunters in Korea, blessed with both great power and speed, with power that allowed him to easily snap a steel pole without using full power, and speed that allowed him to keep up with Jinwoo, someone who was already stupid fast. He's not someone that you take lightly, particularly when it comes to speed. Like Jinwoo, he's classified as a fighter type. However, this is where we start getting into some of his more least desirable traits. He's extremely selfish to the point where you see those big muscles of his and that creepy smile that becomes clear. He doesn't have any real regard for human life. He's also delusional in that he can look at someone who is far ahead of him in power and skill, and instead of being humble and accepting that he's outclassed, the guy thinks that he can keep up with and even take down someone stronger than him, people like Jinwoo and his father Han. He's somewhat of the might makes right mentality, where imposing your will and being strong and imposing your will upon others is the way of life, but he's also smart enough to take advantage of situations where they benefit him, like he did with the whole debacle with Thomas Andre in the story. Now, speaking of Thomas Andre is the strongest hunter in America and is one of the 5 national level hunters. Unlike the others who we cover who are simply fighters, Thomas is a tanker type, and given his big burly stature, it makes complete sense that he's someone that Big E from WWE likes to say he's a
big meaty man slapping meat.
But like tankers, just because he can be used for defense, because of his durability, but that doesn't mean he can't use those big muscles of his to cancel Christmas on you if he gets mad enough at you in combat, because he's strong, and by strong I mean extremely strong. Being able to send Jinwoo flying with the single punch, make shockwaves and wind pressures from the force of his attacks, and fight evenly in combat against someone as strong as Raken. Obviously his durability is the most impressive thing about him, because he's a tanker and that durability is relied upon by whatever allies he has with him. He's been shown taking on ungodly amounts of punishment and still having the durability to continue fighting at a high level immediately after switching to a combat mentality and not losing a step in the process. For instance, when he fights Jinwoo, even after his arms are broken and buildings were destroyed in the battle, the guy was able to continue going and even tank one of the claw slashes by Raken when they fought. You would think with his size he wouldn't be fast, but he's actually very deceptively fast, being able to keep up with speedy fighters like Raken and Jinwoo to an extent, and in the case of Raken, pull off things like getting out of his armor at high speed so fast that Raken didn't even realize what happened until it took place. When he uses capture, he's able to use telekinesis to pull objects towards him, and it's stated that it has the attack potency of a freaking black hole. When he smashes his fist into the ground, he makes shockwaves that will catch anyone who's in the area of the blast radius. He is also able to buff his defense and attack power to insane levels by using reinforcement, which covers him in golden armor and black horns. The durability of this armor, it isn't to be understated either, because when Jinwoo attacks it, despite Jinwoo himself being insanely powerful, he's still bruising his fist with each blow. On top of that, when fighting head up, he's able to send mana into his arms to start dishing out mana amp punches that pack more damage than before. As you would expect with someone with this level of raw power, Thomas does have some extreme aggressive nature to him, and he is a proud man, particularly when it comes to strength and durability, but he isn't one who feels himself above things like camaraderie. There's a sense of honor to his character that you just can't help but love and respect, going so far as to give funerals to people who didn't necessarily deserve them. Another thing of note is that with people this strong, where their power is so much of their character, you'd expect for them to take losing to heart, sometimes even badly, to the point where it changes them. Yet when he falls in battle to Jinwoo, he just accepts the defeat without having any ill will towards Jinwoo, despite how vicious of a fight that took place. He's a man who pays back his debts, and he carries himself with honor and dignity, but is quick to throw that left hook when it's needed in battle, making him one of my personal favorite characters. Next, we have Jay Mills, the S-rank hunter, who came in at number 17 globally, and he was regarded as the strongest hunter in Canada. Like Thomas, he is a tanker type. However, that's where the comparisons stop. Jay can be a bit arrogant, and he can get on your nerves depending on how you like arrogant characters. He constantly lets the power that he possesses cloud his judgment, being extremely overconfident in his abilities, which it does make sense. He was the strongest hunter in his country and one of the strongest in the world, so it makes complete sense that he constantly thinks he has everything under his control, because it's not that many people that can actually rival him. But as we saw when Jinwoo warned him of the looming invasion, the dude just is quick to brush off things that he doesn't respect the information of the people that it's coming from. This is what ultimately led to him getting yeeted when the strongest monarch shows up asking for the king, and this dude, being as cocky as he is, says, "What about it? I'm the king." Then he proceeds to get yeeted by getting burnt to a crisp in mere seconds from a mere breath attack. Next, we have Go Gun-hee, the chairman of the Korean Hunters Association. Gun-hee is another classic example of that tried and tested anime trope where if you see an old man, you better be on guard because they're probably super powerful, more so than their appearance give off. Think of it like Netero from Hunter x Hunter, for example. Gun-hee was the second strongest hunter in Korea after Jinwoo, making him one of the strongest hunters, and that's not cap either. With just a single headbutt, he was shown outright shattering large chunks of ice layered together, and with his bare hands, it didn't matter if there was an energy blast coming from the Frost Monarch, my guy just slaps it away with his bare hands. If we had that meme of Virgin Hunter and Giga Chad Hunter, he'd be the Giga Chad Hunter. When he fought against the Frost Monarch, he was matching the speed of the Frost Monarch briefly, and despite his age, he was able to dodge at point blank range attacks that even the most agile would have had trouble with dodging under normal circumstances, let alone at point blank range. That's up there with Kirito in Sword Art Online Season 2, being able to cut down bullets with a photon blade at point blank range. He's got insane durability, being able to withstand getting stabbed through the chest and still being able to stay conscious, dead set head on, trying to will himself to continue fighting despite the injury, which is made even more impressive when you consider his age. And like Jinwoo, he's able to move objects with telekinesis. He's old, but he's wise and he's humble and has little regard for those who have goals that are aimed at towards filling their own selfish gains and desires at the expense of others. He's a very respectable man. He's also extremely dedicated to his work, not being above putting in the long hours to get the job done, even at the expense of his own health. And as the years had ticked by, that urge to get back out there in battle, it never truly went away, even though he himself knew that his body wasn't able to keep up with his own lust for getting into battle. He's a great example of that expression, old in body but young at heart, which is part of why I like the interactions that he has with characters such as Jinwoo. Now, Christopher Reed is one of the 5 national level hunters, coming in 3rd in the world ranking and coming straight out of the United States. However, you'd think that with a ranking this high that we'd have seen a ton of his power being shown, but the truth is that we don't actually see a ton when it comes to his power. It's the ultimate tease, though given his ranking, you could scale him accordingly against the other characters and use their feats and just slide him above them in whatever respective category you want to use. We only really see him use simple telekinesis and transform into a one-eyed giant with flames that were so hot it took 14 S-rank hunters to put them out, which would make sense just given how high his ranking is, and it would back up the claim of him being one of the strongest in the world. One thing to keep in mind about his character is that even though we didn't see him use his full power, he was clearly very proud of his powers and his skill, going so far as to downplay any possibility that there was some great threat looming out there that he couldn't take care of. Just based off of what little we see from him, he comes across like a character who would fit in very well in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, in that he's someone who can be viewed through the lens of what that series says about the most powerful, which is that the most powerful people are alone. And Chris in this series of solo leveling, he lives alone. He acts and behaves much like a lone wolf, and like an injured lone wolf that is backed into a corner, he's got no issues fighting with every drop of the power that he has until his last breath, like he did against the 3 monarchs that ganged up on him in the series. Next we have Zijang, the strongest hunter in China and ranked 2nd in the world, and is one of the 5 national level hunters like Christopher Reed. His weapon of choice is to use double swords, and he's always ready for a good fight. If you're foolish enough to bring it to him, then you're going to be in for one hell of a fight. However, he's not above saying the truth either. He's not arrogant, even when it might come across like he's a bit too harsh or a bit too honest, and especially if he's a bit too blunt. Like when he outright says, hey, Jinwoo, that guy, he's stronger than me, and pretty much said that if Jinwoo was a number 1, then he himself would be a very distant number 2. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but you get the point. This is even more commendable when you realize that for a long period of time, he was considered the strongest hunter on the continent of Asia until Jinwoo got super powered up after only a few months of training in combat. As you would expect, he's got insane levels of powers and speed, and is so fast that he's shown lopping off the heads of his enemies in the blink of an eye before they can attack, and like others, he's able to use ruler's authority to use telekinesis. The other thing of note is that he's been shown being able to fire off consecutive blasts of energy by using his sword swings, and they carry as much range as they do power, wiping out an entire army with next to no difficulty. One of my favorite moments from this character in the series is when the S-Gate comes down across the ocean and this dude just speed blitzes his way there and kills off the beast before it can make its way to land. One of the more memorable moments for the character in the series, in my opinion. Goto Ryuji is the next hunter that we have, the powerful guild master of the Draw Sword Guild. While on the outside he can come across as the cool, calm, and collected type, in reality he was mad overconfident and was one of the cruelest hunters who we met in the series, with his capacity for cruelty only being matched by his own cunning nature, and he is sneaky observant, being one of the first to realize just how much of his true power Jinwoo was actually holding back. There was a certain lack of humility on his part though. Like some of the others on this list, when it comes to S-rank hunters, he finds it impossible to accept that there might be people who are indeed more powerful than him. Regardless as to what the facts and feats are, it takes a lot for him to even acknowledge that, hey, this guy might be stronger than me. He's very prideful. He's the embodiment of that warning that your hubris can get you killed off if you're not careful, because that's exactly what happens to him later on in the series. In terms of his power, he more than lives up to his status as being a guild leader, being strong enough to make wind blasts with his strikes, and being fast enough to swing his hand at high speeds that allows for that hand to serve as a sword, and fast enough to react to to attacks even when he's caught off guard by a powerful opponent like the Ant King. The problem with him is that when we do see him really ramp it up, he's fighting with people like Jinwoo and Xinjiang. To use a real world example, that's like being Cody Rhodes on the WWE roster as of this recording right now, where Roman Reigns is the champion and Seth Rollins is holding the other championship. You might be good, you might be exceptionally good, but you're not the champion even in your own unfinished story. Now, Reiji Sugimoto is the next hunter that we're going to be going over. Now, before we go further, it is worth noting this is a character who only appears in the webtoon and not in the novels of the story. Sadly, despite him being a S-rank hunter, we don't actually know a lot about the character in terms of power, but I do want to briefly go over what we do know, because he ends up as the guild master of the Draw Sword Guild eventually. He's extremely confident in his own strength and the strength of others in his guild, the strength of his guild in general, and firmly believes that his boss was the strongest hunter in Korea. You can tell him otherwise. Even when Ryuji accepts the possibility that Jinwoo might be stronger than him, when we look at Sugimoto, he refuses to even consider this as being a fact. And it isn't until the Ant King kills Ryuji that he finally comes to grips with the possibility, with the truth that his former guildmaster wasn't as strong as he thought him out to be. While he was still strong, he wasn't the unstoppable S-rank hunter that Sugimoto had built him up in his head to be, and this is later confirmed after he correctly comes to conclusion using basic linear scaling and thinking back to his former guildmaster's words that Jinwoo was stronger than him, because when he hears that the Ant King was defeated, he immediately comes to the conclusion correctly that it was Jinwoo. Sadly, we don't see him use much of his power in battle in a meaningful way, so we can't outright gauge him, but we do know of his S-rank status, so by default he should be covered here, even if it's only briefly. Leonard Man is the next one that we're going to be covering, the number 12 rank hunter and coming straight out of Germany, and is also a guild master. Despite being as powerful as he is, he doesn't brag about his power and is calm and patient with his actions, taking time to gather information, which only aids in his ability to make good sound judgment. He's also extremely observant, as shown in the International Guild Conference arc, where he quickly clocked the huge army of shadow soldiers that Jinwoo had stored away in his shadows. When we first meet him, the story goes out of its way to pretty much let it be known that he's on a level above the other hunters who we met from foreign lands prior to this, but it doesn't outright state it directly, but the implication is there when you read between the lines of the story and look at the small things on how quickly he picked up on that army inside of Jinwoo's shadow. When we do see him in battle, he's shown using teal colored gauntlets around his arms and fires off energy blasts at his enemies to pack a powerful punch. We don't see him fight too much in an extensive way, particularly when Raken attempts to kill him, which would have been the start of a much larger and longer fight. Jinwoo, however, shows up and basically saves Leonard's life in the process, since this was all but confirmed that he would have died had the fight continued on. Finally, we have Yuri Orlov, the Russian S-rank hunter who specializes in barriers. He's big and he's burly in size and is extremely arrogant and overconfident, yet at the same time he is more than aware of the own limits of his body, going so far as to admit that there are hunters who are above him. However, knowing his limits and knowing his worth are two different things. He's greedy, he's charging absurd amounts of money to the Japanese government, knowing full well they can't afford to pay his insane asking price when he demanded this huge number of money following the Jeju Island raid, but he smelled the payday that was coming due to the Japanese government outright begging foreign hunters for help. In short, he's a classic opportunist. However, that doesn't mean he's not skilled. He's S-rank for a reason. His barrier magic is still very good nonetheless, enough so to get him to S-rank level as a hunter. He's also skilled enough that he was able to sense Juan's presence, even though he wasn't able to fully pinpoint his exact location, due to the fact that he is a support type who focuses on barriers and defense. He's not much in terms of combat, so you can't expect too much from him in a fist-to-fist fight. Sure, he can fight if he needs to be, but again, don't count on him too much for anything outside of combat support. That being said, his barriers, they are still no joke, given that he was able to outright restrain some pretty decently powerful people in Hoshino and Kane, and he's shown blocking the S-rank gates, but when faced with giants who were inside of Tokyo, his barriers, they were absolutely nothing, falling to pieces with only a single hit from one of their sword. Now, I know there might be some of you guys who are bummed out that, hey, you didn't cover this A rank hunter, you didn't cover this E rank hunter. What about this character? What about this character? And I'll be sure to make one giant mega video covering all the hunters that we have in solo leveling. So be sure to keep notifications turned on for more solo leveling content, which means subscribe to the KRYPTONIAN SAIYAN channel if you haven't already. In the meantime, click here to watch more solo leveling content that you see on the screen right now.